Good evening, and welcome to this conversation about why Democrats should run on climate, hosted by the DNC Council on Environment and Climate Crisis. I'm Michelle Deatrick, chair of the council. I encourage you to introduce yourselves and ask questions on our Facebook page where this is being streamed. Two of the Climate Council's advisory panel members are going to be there, Chris Round, a senior climate scientist, and Igor Tragub, who is the part of the Young Democrats of California Environmental Caucus. He's the chair. I am excited and honored to be here with our speakers tonight. Actress, author, and activist Jane Fonda, Naina Agrawal-Hardin, who is a national spokesperson from Sunrise, Tamara Toles O'Loughlin, North America Director of 350 Action, and Congresswoman Deb Haaland of New Mexico, who has graciously agreed to lead our land acknowledgement this evening. Thank you, Representative Haaland.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's nice to see you and so nice to be here with all of you. In the spirit of equality, justice, and democracy, we acknowledge that we gather together on lands that have been stewarded through many centuries by the ancestors and the descendants of the tribal nations who have been here since time immemorial. We honor the communities native to this continent and recognize that our country was built on indigenous homelands with the bounty of resources given to us by the Creator. We pay our respects to the millions of indigenous people throughout history who have protected our lands, waters, and animals so that we could all be here today, and we move forward to carry on this legacy. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Representative Haaland, for this beginning to our evening together, a grounding and reminder to center the land and the water, their history and rights, and to remember and center the history and voices and leadership of Indigenous peoples in the environmental movement. I'm really grateful for your presence. It is now my great honor to introduce our first panelist, our moderator for the evening, Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda is a two-time Academy Award-winning actress, author, activist, and fitness guru. Her career has spanned over 50 years, including over 45 films, and crucial work on behalf of political causes such as women's rights and the environment. She is a winner of many awards, including 3 Golden Globes and a 2014 AFI Life Achievement Award. She is currently in production for the 7th and final season of The Wonderful Grace and Frankie, and was last seen on the big screen in Paramount's Comedy Book Club. Jane Fonda also premiered Jane Fonda in 5 Acts, a documentary chronicling her life and long history of incredible activism at the 2018 Sundance Film Festival. She celebrated her 50th birthday, I think this is awesome, by raising $1 million for each of her nonprofits, Georgia Campaign for Adolescent Power and Potential, and the Women's Media Center. Currently, Jane is leading the charge on Fire Drill Fridays, which is an important national movement to protest government inaction on climate change. Her latest book to be released in September is titled, What Can I Do? My Path from Climate Despair to Action, detailing her personal history and providing solutions for communities to combat the climate crisis. My copy is already on pre-order and I'm looking forward. Jane, you've been an activist for a long time. What are your thoughts about this moment we are in with the climate crisis and about the opportunities that lie in front of us?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. You asked me to talk about why Democrats should run on climate, or if they should run on climate. And so I'm going to talk about that. There are many reasons that Democrats should run on climate. There are purely pragmatic political ones, and then there are the profound long-term, you'll look back from your deathbed and feel proud reasons. So let's start with pragmatism. Research shows that 71% of Americans, including Republicans, favor bold government action to combat climate change and would vote for a Democrat who supports taking such action over a Republican who doesn't. This is particularly true among key groups that Democrats need: center-right voters, younger voters, and Latinx voters, especially women. So just that statement right there lets you know that you, candidates, won't get in trouble politically by running on climate, at least not with the majority of Americans. But here's a few words of warning. If you run on climate and want to be taken seriously, you can't take money from the fossil fuel industry or its executives or lobbyists. You must educate yourself as to why fracked gas is not a bridge energy and must be halted. It's really destructive both to the environment, to climate, and to human health. And finally, you can't support the demand side things just all by themselves, solar and wind turbines and all of that. Supporting that is great, but it's not enough. You also have to say no new fossil fuel permits or subsidies. And you have to support the gradual phasing out of all already existing fossil fuel infrastructure by 2050 at the very latest, while guaranteeing equivalent jobs and benefits for workers who are transitioning from the fossil fuel sectors. Okay, those are important warnings. Now here's the long-term history-making reasons to run on climate. And I'm going to start with the science. I mean, if one of the many things that the COVID pandemic has taught us is the importance of listening to science, right? 97% of climate scientists, as well as every National Academy of Science in the world, and institutions like the World Bank and the International Energy Agency, all say that we're headed toward catastrophic levels of warming. In 2018, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, published its report, which stated in no uncertain terms that given the worsening disasters we're already seeing and the additional warming that's already baked in because we didn't act 30 years ago, we don't stand a chance at changing course in time without profound systemic economic and social change. And they said we have, at best, 11 years to cut carbon emissions in half before the tipping point is reached. Now, that was in 2018. So now we have a mere 10 years to cut emissions in half and then gradually reduce them to zero by 2050 or before. Now, there is no historical precedent for the scale of the transitions that have to happen. Humanity's never been confronted with such a challenge, not even during the Great Depression in the 1930s or the two world wars, because this, science says, will be planetarily irreversible if we pass the tipping point without cutting emissions. And the challenge is immediate. It's too late for moderation, for incrementalism. The fossil fuel industry has seen to that by lying to us for 50 years about the damage they knew they were causing. So running on climate, fighting for the climate, now means being brave enough to take the big, bold actions that are commensurate with the crisis we face when time is running out. This is the time for the guts Roosevelt showed by creating and implementing the New Deal. You can do it again and do it better this time, including people of color and indigenous people and women. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us the deep fault lines in our economic and social systems. Now, it's necessary now to address and solve them quickly. This requires an economic recovery that centers the most vulnerable and hardest hit, strengthening the low carbon sectors of our economy like teachers, nurses, home caregivers, and today's essential workers, rebuilding the healthcare system, making it resilient, equitable, and prepared to withstand the inevitable pandemics. They're going to come. Whether we like it or not, they're coming because of the climate crisis. Now, fortunately, and this is a critical point, the path to doing all of that I just mentioned will also address the climate crisis. The Green New Deal resolution describes the path. And while some in Congress have said that that's just pie in the sky, it's the way to heal the planet while healing our broken economy, our struggling communities, and our racial disparities. It's the bold framework that's commensurate with the size of the crisis. It may look radical to some, but it's actually moderate given the size of the problem and the time that we have left to slow it down. Change is coming, whether we like it or not. Change is coming by catastrophe or by design. The New Deal, the Green New Deal, provides us with a design, and parts of it are already being implemented in different areas of the United States. And yeah, it's expensive, which is one reason why so many people have been fighting to use the vast sums in the COVID-19 stimulus bills to simultaneously solve our economic and jobs crisis and climate crisis. Instead of sinking billions of dollars into the fossil fuel industry that was failing even before COVID, as Trump has done, we need to put that money into electric transit systems, solar panels, and smart grid, all of which will create thousands more jobs per dollar invested. And it moves us closer to what the science is demanding. So this is your time. You're living at the last possible moment in human history when you can do something about climate change or fail to do so, thereby denying hundreds of millions of people a livable future. One of the speakers last winter at the Fire Drill Fridays in DC was Mark Magana. He's founder of Green Latinos. He asked the crowd if we'd ever watched documentaries about brave leaders, you know, like Cesar Chavez or Harriet Tubman or Rosa Parks, and seen those documentaries and then asked ourselves, would we have been brave enough like them to face the clubs and the hoses and the dogs? And then he said, well, you don't have to wonder anymore. You're all in a documentary moment where you're going to be tested. As our elected officials and candidates, you are in your documentary moment. We need you to be brave. Boldly leading on climate improves your chances on election day and improves our collective chance for a healthy, secure future. Thank you. And now let me introduce and ask questions of our 4 fierce female guests and ask them audience questions. And my first guest is Congresswoman Deb Haaland. I'm so happy to see you.
Hi, Jane.
Congresswoman Haaland.
Thank you. That was wonderful. It gave me the chills. Thank you for saying what you said. It was beautiful.
Congresswoman Haaland is New Mexico's representative for the 1st Congressional District. Deb is an enrolled member of the Pueblo of Laguna. She grew up in a military family. Her father was a 30-year combat Marine who was awarded the Silver Star Medal during Vietnam. Deb has lived the struggle of everyday New Mexicans. She understands their needs and is best equipped to be our family's fiercest advocate in Washington. In Congress, she's fought tirelessly to create opportunities and improve livelihood for all New Mexicans. Deb currently serves on Armed Services Committee and is the Vice Chair of Natural Resources Committees. She's serving on Vice President's Climate Engagement Council and is a member of the Global Steering Committee for the Campaign for Nature. Congresswoman Haaland, welcome, and tell us, what are people looking for from Washington when it comes to climate solutions?
Well, I think one of the first things, Jane, is that voters need to know that you really care. You know, I had a call with someone the other day. He's purposely set up a call for me. He sort of interviewed me about where I stood. And he asked, like, how did you grow up? Where did you grow up? Why do you care about the environment so much, right? He was really digging at, was I for real, or was I just saying that I care about the climate because it's politically expedient? By the time the conversation was over, of course, he said, thank you so much. Yes, I know you care, right? Like I have a clothesline. I hang up my clothes every day. I don't use the dryer. I do all these things, but I think that voters want candidates who are real. I did take the fossil fuel pledge, and thank you for mentioning that today. And I've never taken any money from the fossil fuel industry. And one of the reasons is because New Mexico has the largest methane cloud floating above our state in vulnerable communities on the Navajo Nation. And they make messes, they never clean them up. And so I think voters also want us in Washington to hold people accountable for the pollution that they send out all over our lands. We've had, while on the Natural Resources Committee, we've had hearings where we have tried to hold this Trump administration accountable. You know, he's had PhD climate scientists, or the President Obama had PhD climate scientists studying climate change in places like Alaska. Trump comes in and takes those PhD scientists and put them in the auditing department, where they won't expose him for who he is. I think voters want folks who want to protect our public lands. And right now, this administration cutting off big swaths of our public lands in Bears Ears, Grand Staircase, Escalante, my ancestral homelands. Right now, our public lands emit 25% of the carbon into the atmosphere. And we have to protect our public lands, and we have to protect them from these extractive industries. So yes, I'm an original on the Green New Deal. I took the fossil fuel pledge, and I'll tell you why we should run on climate change, because I won. That was my #1 issue. I didn't care how it was polling. I care about the environment. That's who I am. And so that was my #1 issue.
Thank you, Deb. I wish I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much. God bless. Stay strong.
Thank you.
Now I want to introduce someone you already know, Michelle Deatrick, who works as an environmentalist, centers justice and an urgent transition away from fossil fuels to clean, renewable energy, and land protection and healing. She's the chair and founder of the DNC Climate Crisis Council and a Michigan DNC member where we met. Michelle is a former policy analyst and Peace Corps volunteer who served recently as an elected official. She's also an award-winning poet who lives on her family's Michigan farm, where she cares for a small orchard and big garden and a native prairie. Welcome, Michelle. You created the DNC Environment and Climate Crisis Council to advocate for Democrats and the National Party, upholding bolder and braver, more ambitious climate policy. Tell us how that's going.
So little background, when the DNC, as you may remember, it was in the news, voted against a climate debate last summer. Well, we'd already been pushing the DNC leadership for over almost a year to establish a climate council. There'd been 3 prior attempts which hadn't worked out. The debate was voted down, as you know, but we were able to take that sort of political opening, that opportunity with the growing public outcry around these issues, and we're able to get passage with unanimously at the DNC in the end for the first ever DNC Climate Council. And the first thing that we did was to launch a national listening tour. So at first it was in person, and it's moved obviously to a virtual listening tour, but we met with diverse, inclusive groups all over the country in South Carolina, Nevada, California, Colorado, farmers in Iowa whose fields were flooded and had no crops. We met with people who'd escaped California wildfires with just the clothes on their back, quite literally, and people in the Southeast who had endured one hurricane after another. So here's what we learned in part. First of all, what a privilege it is for people to open up about these things and the trauma in many cases that they are dealing with on an ongoing basis already. We are in the climate crisis now. And people know, as Greta has said, the house is on fire. It is an emergency. They know Republicans aren't going to do anything about it. And they really want the Democratic Party to step up and to be the party of climate solutions. So the stories and conversations also confirmed, and it's always nice to have confirmation about polling, that the polling really was accurate. Even then we knew that climate and environment consistently among the top 2 issues for people across America. And also that it's a motivator to get people out to vote. So people care about this issue. They want people, as you said so eloquently, Jane, they want Democrats to run on climate because it's the right thing to do and it's impacting them now. And something that's become more, was apparent to many of the people who've been working on these issues for decades, but I think it's become more apparent to the nation generally over the last year, is that it's impossible to address racial and economic injustice, systemic racism, and white supremacy without addressing the climate crisis, and vice versa. These things are integrally related. And as the climate crisis gets worse, the disproportionate impact we're already seeing on Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples, under-resourced communities, is going to get worse faster in those communities. Democrats should and do uphold justice as an inherent value. So good policy to run on climate issues, but also really good politics. It matters a lot for this November, and it matters up and down the ballot. So if we've been able to turn out more people of the voters who rate environment as one of their top 2 issues in Wisconsin in 2016, we would have won the state. It would have made a difference here in Michigan. So building on what we've learned through our national listening tour, the council gathered a diverse and really inclusive group of people and developed a set of recommendations we've been advocating for including in the 2020 Democratic Party platform, our 4-year party platform, our policy North Star going forward. We had the advice of a lot of environmental justice and climate groups, including Sunrise and 350, so representatives of whom are going to be speaking later. And we're a new council, we know what to expect. We ended up with 25,000 signatures on our petition, 150 different environmental, youth, democratic organizations signing on and endorsing a really strong, broad coalition that we hope to be mobilizing going forward, including Greenpeace and Sierra Club, 350, but also the Young Democrats of Michigan and the Democratic Club of Claremont. Jane, you've already talked some about some of the terrific new polling that is coming out from Climate Power 2020 and Data Progress. I just want to give them a shout out because they're doing really terrific work in the Global Strategy Group, I think it's called. And they really, this new polling really confirms that the mission and strategy of the Climate Council and all the things that people on this call have been saying for a long time, many of us, are really right, that Democrats win when they run on climate, and specifically when they run bold on climate. We can build a coalition of younger Latinx and center to right voters on climate issues. And one piece of polling that's just out, which I find fascinating, is that when you ask voters, what about if we spend $10 trillion on climate and investments over the next 10 years? That's the amount that have been proposed by Senators Warren, Castro, and Harris. So you think, wow, is that going to change things? It doesn't. Even the independent and undecided voters, they aren't turned off by it, and it really excites younger and Latinx voters, which means turnout. So people need the Democratic Party to step up. I say that a lot, and this is a win-win-win. There are very few of those in politics. The planet wins, the people win, the party wins, and the economy wins. So I guess that's a 4th win that I didn't add. We boost the economy, we create good family union jobs, and build new infrastructure that takes us on in very much a FDR Roosevelt kind of way, as you were saying. So that's why this council is going to keep encouraging the party to take bold action. It's why we're building a network of state Democratic Party environmental caucuses, networking them to work together going forward, because we're not going away. And we're also beginning this fall to start training people to run for office on environmental issues. People care about the environment, and also crucially, the people from the front line in vulnerable communities who are too often left out or ignored, even though they've been working on these issues for decades. Thanks.
So let me just ask you another question. You were elected as a county commissioner, and in the process, you flipped a red seat to blue in 2016. Do you think, well, I guess from what you said, you do think that a message of bold climate policy will help Democrats at the local level as well as the national level?
I do. I was supposed to lose that seat, by the way, and I proved them wrong. And 2016 was not a good year for Democrats, right? So this was one of only 6 seats flipped red to blue in Michigan at the county level or above in that year. I beat a 3-term Republican by a healthy margin. And I campaigned in part on climate and environmental issues. And, you know, what we did was we spoke about the climate and environment in terms of what was happening locally. So people like me, farmers who hadn't been able to harvest crops for a couple of years because rainfall has increased by 50%. I can look out to the left of my window right now and look at the 40 acres that have had no crops for 3 years. Talking about them with that, talking about the fossil fuel pipeline passing so close to a very popular children's summer camp that it put it in the incineration zone, things like that. It's a global issue with a very local, unique impacts, and we found that was something that was nonpartisan. No one wanted that pipeline to be putting their kids in danger. No one wanted the dump to be stinking up their neighborhood so their kids couldn't play outside at recess at the school. So I absolutely think we can win on climate, you know, in the Rust Belt where I live, the plains and the mountains, not just the coasts, because it is such a universal issue. So we can run and we can win on this. Great.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks for pulling all this together. And now I want to reconnect with an amazing woman. Tamara Toles O'Loughlin is a native New Yorker and environmentalist focused on equity, access, and community. She develops capacity building programs and creates multimedia campaigns to dismantle privilege and increase opportunities for vulnerable populations to access healthy air, clean energy, and a toxic-free economy at the local, regional, and national level. Tamara is the North American Director at 350.org, actually 350 Action, where she drives mission-critical work and organizational investments to build a multiracial, multi-generational climate movement that is capable of holding our leaders accountable to science and justice. Welcome, Tamara. It's great to see you here. And are you here?
Yeah, good to see you again.
Okay, good to see you. What are 350 Action and other groups doing to mobilize climate voters for November?
Well, as a Generation X, I'm in between a few different groups. So I'm going to do a little show and tell and share my screen.
Cool.
See what I can do here. Okay, so now you all get to see what's on my screen. Really quickly, we'll move to what 350's been up to. So Jane was correct the first time. I'm the North America Director of 350. I'm also the North America Director of 350 Action. So it's actually just a question of which hat I'm wearing. In terms of what we are here to do, I'm going to give you 10 good reasons why climate is the best thing you could do for a Democratic ticket that will win. One, we're in the middle of a crazy moment. It's all happening. To be fair, some of the panelists prior have spoken to some of these issues, but what I think is most important, and my number 10 reason why you should run with climate as your go-to issue is because we don't have time for politics as usual. We're in the middle of the fight of our lives and at the top of the climate decade. And in 2030, we'll look back on all of the things we could have done, and you don't want to be on the wrong side of history. The number 2 reason is the next big moment's already here. Jane referred to it, and Michelle as well, that there are moments when you look back at them, when when the railroads changed the way folks traveled across the United States, among other reasons why that's really important. These are the kinds of things where you look back and you think, what would I have done if I was around in that moment? This is one of those moments where we will look back and wish that we had stood up for the things that we care for, and for the generations to come. The next reason is that voters are here for change and are rejecting what we've already failed to do. So we have a generation of voters who are here with all the facts. They have the stats. They read what it would have taken lifetimes to consume in a day. And they already know that if you aren't for what the numbers are showing you, that you're not going to get a vote from them. So the number 6 reason, this is the time for multi-generational voting. We are in a moment where there are 4 different generations of people operating in the workplace at the same time. And the only crossover issue that covers the rest and connects to them is climate. So if you want to be focused on education and where money can go to support communities in the long run, if you're here for direct services, or your number 1 issue is connecting us to the next generation economy, then climate is in fact the thing that you should be looking towards. The number 5 reason, we are here. Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, people of different abilities. We are in a syndemic moment, which means there's so many things coming at us. It would be difficult to talk about what the worst threat of them are. And we are communities made vulnerable, and after being exposed to so many different things, that fixing climate is the fastest way to start to make change for all of the communities that could be really strong advocates for change. Number 4, the political moment that we are looking for is here, and political courage is what we need to strengthen our communities in the next decade. So we are in a moment where political courage is the missing ingredient. We have all the facts. We have had the science for a long time. We have had enough children marching in the streets and risking their lives to convince anyone of anything. What we need next is political courage. Takes me to my next point. The future is digital. We're in a moment where we can register voters who are purged from the ballot, where we can leverage our networks to create voter plans and register folks who are our friends and enemies alike with a click. We are here for get out the vote, when we have Senate and presidential races where the underlying issue is a failure to be able to vote by mail and to combat voter suppression. We're in a moment where all the issues are coming together. Voter suppression, gerrymandering, the census. These are all things that can be overcome, and our digital volunteers are here to make sure that happens. Let's see if I can move to the next slide here. What's going on? Importantly, I think there are a lot of things that my co-pilots in this conversation have said, but let's talk a little bit about the fact that we make endorsements at 350 up and down the ballot in Senate races, from in every Senate race you can imagine, and the White House. And the class of folks who are endorsed by 350 stand for a Green New Deal, Medicaid for all, reparations for Black and Indigenous communities, who sometimes refer to it as land back, and a path to citizenship for all immigrants. So the folks who are supported by 350 action are here for real change. And they are all over the place. They are in Colorado, Arizona, in Maine, in North Carolina, in Georgia, and in Texas. And if you look at this chart, you'll see that they're up against a lot of voter suppression in a time when we could really make some changes so that we could do deep work. So amongst the reasons why it's time to start to talk a bit more about what our priority states mean, what endorsement from 350 can do, and the time that we're in is now, because this is an election cycle that is driven a lot by fear, and there's so much that is holding people back. But we are also people who want to lead with a vision for what we want to see. We are fighting for a just recovery in a COVID moment, for environmental justice after decades of pushing for it, for a government that will keep fossil fuels in the ground, and a Green New Deal, which in plain English is jobs, infrastructure, and human health. As elected officials, you already know those are things that will happen anyway. So if we choose to invest wisely, there'll be things that buoy us to the next generation. And my final and most important reason why a democratic platform should really center climate is that we will not stop. We will organize with you, or we will organize you. We will be at your house. We will be outside your door. We will march past your streets. We will make you feel like you're a part of us, so you might as well join. And I'm happy to have a conversation following this about what that means, where we are, and how we can be supportive of a real climate agenda.
All right, Tamara, that's fierce. Now I have to try to get my screen back. How do I do that?
Let me.
Huh?
Can you pull that over?
Pull this over?
Is it your screen?
Jane, try pressing escape.
Yeah. There we go.
Powerful, Tamara, thanks. And now I'd like to introduce Naina Agrawal-Hardin. She is 17 years old, an organizer from Ann Arbor, Michigan. She's a local and national leader in the youth climate strike movement. She's been a leader of the Sunrise Movement's national high school engagement initiatives and also provides national political and partnership support, representing Sunshine on the National U.S. Youth Climate Strike Coalition. Welcome, Naina. It's really good to have you here. And I want to express my thanks for the courage, enormous courage and persistence that the youth climate strikers have brought to the table. You've influenced so many people, inspired them, and I'm one of them, so I'm really, really grateful. Tell us, turning out the youth vote could make all the difference in this election, right? So how can we use this issue to mobilize younger voters?
That's a great question, Jane, and it's also absolutely surreal to be being introduced by you. Thank you for all your work on these issues. And yeah, I mean, we've seen across the board, across all generations, that climate is a powerful electoral issue, especially in recent years. And specifically, the Green New Deal is incredible in elections because it's a broad framework that can be adapted to best suit the district that a candidate is in. So Sunrise, like 350 Action, endorses candidates. And we've seen some recent victories. Jamal Bowman in New York's 16th district was a huge Green New Deal champion and talked about clean air and about jobs opportunities. Mike Siegel in Texas's 10th talks about a just transition to unite the climate and the labor movement in Texas and in his district. Also talks about a diversified economy to appeal to rural voters. And even Bernie Sanders himself won and came close to winning in Iowa by talking about flooding and climate change and the way that that was going to affect farmers in that state. We also saw Charles Booker in Kentucky's Senate primary talk about the Green New Deal from an economic framework, talk about infrastructure, talk about union jobs, and Booker came very, very, very close to winning his primary against Amy McGrath, which is huge to have a Black man run on an unapologetically progressive platform in Kentucky and come that close. And you know, these victories are backed up by some of this polling that we've been talking about over the course of the evening, showing that climate opens huge, even 14 or 20 point leads for Democrats against Republicans, especially among center-right voters, among young voters, and even among independents in battleground states like Michigan, where I'm from. So we've seen, you know, how this moves voters across the board, but it also particularly moves young voters. In the case of Jamal Bowman, Sunrisers made 85%, I think, of the calls to voters in his district, which is huge. And that's not just Sunrisers from New York, it's Sunrisers from all over the country, young people who know that our votes can be the margin of victory in races like this one. I had friends here in Michigan who are rising seniors in high school like I am, who are generally not very political people. And they were so excited about Charles Booker and his message and what he stands for, that they made calls for him all the way from their bedrooms here in Michigan. You know, some of them never having been to Kentucky in their lives. And that's because he was speaking to our issues. So it's no secret that young people have really been excited about unapologetically progressive agenda that talks about climate justice, talks about a just transition, it's also no secret that young people haven't been very excited about Vice President Biden. And I can say, as a young person who will not be able to vote in the November election because I won't be old enough, that it's been really challenging to feel so powerless. And I've watched the young people around me just lose so much hope and energy and faith in our country and in our democracy after seeing how the primary played out. So many of them were making calls for Bernie, making calls for these Green New Deal candidates, and felt really crushed when they saw how the primary ended up. And that was really hard to watch as someone who loves this country and loves our democracy and knows that we have so much potential to be better than this. It was hard to watch so many of my peers sort of lose that faith and lose that excitement. But we've recently seen some real strides from the vice president on climate, right? We saw a recent release of details that included a commitment to 100% clean electricity by 2035, as opposed to 2050. We saw him up the ante in his ambition in terms of investment. I believe it was initially 1.7 trillion over 10 years of investment, and now it's 2 trillion over 4, which is massive. And furthermore, we saw really incredible environmental justice commitments, like I believe it's 40% of those investments going to marginalized and frontline communities, which is critical. And we were so far from that point even 4 years ago, which really just goes to show how much the climate movement, and specifically young people, have been able to accomplish in shifting the political weather and building momentum for an ambitious climate agenda in this country over the past 4 years. And with those recent strides on climate, I saw those friends who had become so disenfranchised start to have just a faint glimmer of hope that maybe social movements can push our presidential nominee and also other candidates up and down the ballot, that maybe we do have a chance at a livable and just future. And that's been amazing too, to see that hope reemerge. And I know it's critical that we keep the pressure on our political leaders in order to maintain and build on that sense of hope. For young people, climate is a top issue for us because when you talk about investing in clean jobs, clean air, clean infrastructure, clean water, and crucially, environmental justice, you're speaking directly to our generation. You're telling us that you plan to invest in us, in our present and in our future. And that's incredibly powerful. And it's something that's been missing from our politics for a long time. But to win in 2020, we are going to need everyone to come out. And climate is an issue that helps, especially with young voters, with Black, Brown, and Indigenous voters, and with other key demographics, even with swing voters. And let's talk about swing states for a minute. I mean, Trump's margin of victory in 2016, here in Michigan, in Wisconsin, and I think this was almost true of Pennsylvania too, it was smaller than the amount of votes for Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate. So we know that climate is energizing key demographics. And if we get it right this election cycle, if we push a bold climate justice agenda, if we stop running away from ambition, from language about a transformation and a societal mobilization, that's one of the best ways to ensure that we can avoid a repeat of what happened in 2016. Because the votes are there. If we've learned anything over the past 4 years, if we've learned anything from recent polling, from recent protest movements, it's that the votes are there. We just need to earn them. And for Democrats to do that, they need to be running on climate.
Thank you so much. That was great. Encourage the young people that you work with to study history, because history shows that nothing important ever happened without a mobilized public putting pressure. They should study the New Deal. It's, Franklin Delano Roosevelt wasn't so hot on doing all of the things that he was being asked to do by working people and farmers and everything. And he said to them, I agree with what you're asking for, now go out and make me do it, right? So we have to go out and make him do it, Joe Biden. And I think that he also actually said publicly that he would 100% ban fracking on public land. Am I right?
I believe that's correct. I believe that's correct, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. So we're going to start taking questions from our audience. The first one is from Wanda in Michigan. I think I know Wanda. We've worked together on One Fair Wage. And she says, France installed clean mineral water drinking fountains across the country, accessible to all and free. Do you see this as a possibility in the US? Michelle, do you want to take this one?
I have lots to say about it, but I also know that Representative Haaland has to go to another event, and I am guessing she has some keen insights about water issues. So I would love it if she would comment on that, and if she had any other words she wanted to share with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that sounds wonderful, of course. Look, it's impossible to talk about the climate crisis we are tonight in America without also speaking about the dire need for environmental justice. People of color, including indigenous communities, have disproportionately suffered from air pollution, water pollution, and exposure to toxic sites. And in fact, the Navajo Nation, who I'm sure all of you have heard about, they're experiencing this very thing right now. And now the world knows that they're having some of the highest COVID cases. And partly due to that is that they have no running water. Some people do not have running water. So yes, we need access to drinking water for everyone, but we also need to make sure that all communities have running water. That should be a human right in this country. As you may know, I had a unique opportunity to be part of the Democratic National Convention Platform Drafting Committee, and I'm pleased that the platform draft sets out the most ambitious targets in history of the Democratic Party platform to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as I talked about earlier, across the economy, and to do it by investing in upfront clean energy, clean manufacturing, clean buildings, clean transportation, and of course, water. We'll rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, so that's where we'll get on board on day one when we have a new president, and we're all going to vote in November, so we're going to make that happen. And the draft platform argues for a creation of an environmental justice fund to make historic investments aimed at eliminating the legacy of pollution in so many minority communities. And Jane, you know as well as I do that it's Native American communities that suffer so much from this. So, I'll just say real quick, because I know my time is short, that this platform also supports protecting the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is sacred to Alaska Natives, yes. It sets an ambitious goal of conserving 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. And I have legislation in the House that we're pushing for that as well. It pledges to ensure our nation's public lands and national parks tell the full story of a diverse America. So I know that we're all talking about moving into the future, and this future includes electing a new president, making sure that our platform is one that we can all get our teeth around, and that's basically something that I think we can all support. So, and of course, Jane, you mentioned workers. It absolutely includes strong labor standards in the clean energy economy and training and hiring workers from frontline environmental justice communities. One of the things we see with this pandemic is that it's laid bare so many of the disparities that communities of color suffer. And so we have to make things right, and I believe we will.
Thanks, Deb.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For those who are interested to know what to do about the really profound problems around water, I urge you to go onto the website foodandwaterwatch.org, and you will find out about what to do and where it's already happening. The next question, Patrick asks this: Modernizing the National Environmental Policy Act includes lifting regulations so that companies can pollute at will and squelches public input on the impact of those actions on communities. He asks, aren't these regulations essentially protections for people? And don't these changes move the risk from companies to communities? And is this a smart thing to do in the middle of a pandemic? And that's at its heart is a respiratory and pulmonary ailment. Has Deb left? Michelle, do you want to, who would like to take that question?
Tamara,
Tamara.
Yeah.
Go for it.
muted.
Happy to jump in here and say NEPA is one of the touchstone pieces of environmental legislation in what used to be one of the most impressive landscapes for environmental protection in the world. It is the gateway for how we protect all kinds of communities, and regulations are where the rubber meets the road. So if we do not have the safeguards that will protect us in a moment when things are calm, they certainly won't help us in the middle of the largest layer of climate, COVID, and climate disasters that we've ever seen. So we're in a moment where pollution is now unfettered. Rollbacks are reigning supreme. We have a feckless, negligent man in the White House, from Queens, might I add. And I just want to flag that in the middle of all of that, we are facing a lack of basic protections for Black, Indigenous, and people of color who have counted on NEPA just to get their crises in the door. So we should be terrified about a moment that the trajectory that we're on, and looking to the thresholds like the lack of enforcement and the lack of NEPA as real safeguards that it's time to change our politic.
Thanks. Feckless. Good word. You don't hear that too often.
It's a good one.
That's only because you're not in my office as I read the news.
So, I might direct this to you, Naina. See what you think. This is a question from Virginia in California. She wants to know, what is the jobs retraining component of the new environment and climate crisis plan, and how does it relate to the proposals in the original Green New Deal proposal itself? Naina, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'm happy to start it off and then can pass to Michelle if she wants to add anything. And I would say I'm less of a specialist in the jobs component and more of a specialist in the justice component, but the Green New Deal resolution and the principles of the Green New Deal are very much about a union of those two things, jobs and justice. They're very much about good, high-paying union jobs, very much about federal jobs guarantee to make sure that anyone who wants to work can, and that those people are making a living wage. And what I've heard about the jobs component of the new climate crisis plan is that it's a great step in that direction. We have the, I'm forgetting the name, but what I think it was the Climate Crisis Corps or something along those lines, that promises to put to work hopefully millions, but certainly thousands of people if Biden is elected. And that's extremely exciting. And it's absolutely a pathway to that federal jobs guarantee and to that union of jobs and justice. And I also just want to say that for so long, climate and labor, climate and jobs have been in opposition to each other. And that has prevented so much from getting done. And so to see the Vice President Biden say, you know, when President Trump talks about climate, he says hoax. And when I think about climate, when I talk about climate, I think jobs. That is an incredible advance from where we were just 4 years ago. And it is just so incredibly important for making the progress that we need on this issue, that we've gotten to that point of messaging from our political leaders.
Yeah. You know, many of the fossil fuel jobs are unionized. And so you have workers that are earning a salary with benefits that can support a family and buy a house and send children to school. And we can't ask them to then go and take jobs that are almost sub-minimum. And unfortunately, right now in the renewable energy sector, you don't have a lot of good paying jobs. Tesla, for example, you know, fires anybody that tries to unionize. We have to change that. We have to make sure that when we retrain workers, that have really good family supporting jobs into the renewable sector, that they have those same kind of jobs. And it's been done successfully. Well, in Germany, 30,000 coal miners have been transitioned off of coal into new jobs. And it's because the government, the community, the workers, the unions, everybody was at the table working out a just transition. And that can be done in this country. It's happened in Maine, it's happened in New York, it's happening in Colorado. It can work, it can work. Thanks, Naina. Okay, there's a last question. Channing from Ohio asks, can we talk about fear and how it slows down Democrats from speaking the climate truth, and about what that fear consists of? Is it the fear of losing, the fear of not knowing enough about climate, or the fear of speaking the hard truth to voters? And how do we help our Democratic leaders to overcome the fear that holds us back from winning? Who should take that question?
I'm happy to start. One, I think, I'm not sure, I talked about it in my opening, that there's real fear. I think the only fear is the fear of retribution from fossil fuel capitalists who have sprinkled so much money throughout the democracy that it's impossible to make a choice you believe in your whole heart. I recognize that there are tons of advocates inside of these narrow halls, and to quote Hillary Clinton's joke on Twitter today, the Zoom where it happens, since nobody's in any hallways these days.
That's a good
Recognizing that political courage is the necessary ingredient for us to move forward. There are folks in the street, and every time they do so, they create more runway for aggressive work. So it's time for everyone to tap into the courage and recognize that the old math, the old polling, the old demographics, the old ways of working are lessons in how to fail. And if we want to succeed, we have to listen to the voices coming from every corner of our country demanding political action, expediency on climate, and reckoning before we all get wrecked.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, all of you. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And Michelle is now going to make closing remarks and wrap up the event.
Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Jane, you're an incredible moderator and so generous. And anyway, I've been a big fan of your activism, interacting for a long time, and thank you for being here with us. Tamara, you added so much to this conversation and have been, again, I'm like a fan of every single person on this call. So thank you for all that you have done and are doing, will be doing in so many areas around environmental justice and climate activism. And Naina, I know we actually have the same hometown, and I am lucky enough to have known her for the last couple of years. She's already doing incredible work, and I know will continue to. I just want to, and also thank you so much to Representative Haaland for making time to be with us and for her really important insights. I wanted to point everyone toward our website. If you go to dncclimate.org, there's two C's in the middle, dncclimate.org/updates. You can sign up to hear about our calls to action, help us out going forward as we continue to do the work of ensuring that we have Democrats who have the political courage to run on climate, and that we support them in doing that when they have that courage, because what Tamara said is really true. The fossil fuel industry is out there. They are taking aim at politicians and Democratic Party leaders who are brave enough to speak up. And if we want to keep them in the mix and we want them to win and go forward, we need to be there for them as we want them to be there for us. Thank you so much to everyone who's been commenting and talking on Facebook, to Igor and Chris who've been keeping up that conversation. And want to point you to two future events. We're going to be following this up with another conversation about how Democrats can win on climate. And I have to give Tamara credit for these ideas for these conversations. I think it was actually brilliant. Thank you. And then at the Democratic Party convention on August 18th, we will be broadcasting live from there as well, and we'll get more details out if you sign up at our website. Thank you so much for being here, and good night. I lost my notes.
Good night, everyone. Keep up the good work.